Today I'm doing a transmission service on a 2012 Nissan Altima, which of course has the CVT transmission. These transmissions do not have the best reputation, so I think it's a good idea to stay on top of the service. That being said, there's a few different ways you can do this, and I'm going to be doing the most basic way, and I think the most critical thing to do, which is just changing out the fluid. There's two filters actually in this transmission, both are replaceable, and I would not advise that you don't do them, but I think that they are a far second place to just simply keeping clean fluid in it. Transmissions do not generate large particles or chunks of debris. They generate very fine clutch material wear and things like that, most of which stays captured in the fluid, suspended in the fluid. It is not large enough to get captured in the filters. The filters simply do not catch this stuff. And so that's why it's important to change out the fluid. And so that's why I think simply changing out the fluid is the #1 thing to do. If you want to get a little bit more aggressive with it and drop the pan and change out the pan filter, and then there's another filter up a little higher, then by all means, I'm not going to tell you shouldn't do that. I will put links in the description for all of this stuff, even though I'm just doing the fluid change. I will put links in the description for the fluid and for both filters. So check that out if that's the route you want to go. The other thing I want to cover real quick is fluid. In this case, I'm going to be using the Valvoline CVT fluid. This meets the Nissan NS-2 standard. It says right on the back it meets that standard. There's three things when it comes to transmission fluid. The least important is the manufacturer of it, and most of the time you might not know that. Valvoline probably is the manufacturer of this stuff. Valvoline, I believe, is the original oil company, so they're one of the big ones. But you know, if you get Nissan CVT fluid, I don't know that Nissan actually makes that. It's probably made by somebody else. So I wouldn't advise against running a Nissan fluid. You can't go wrong running the OE fluid in a car, but that's not something that's required. The main thing is that it meets the standard. So three things: manufacturer, which sometimes we don't even know; brand, which is different than the manufacturer. In this case, it's Valvoline; and then type. Of those three things, the only thing that you have to meet is the type requirement. So this meets the NS-2 requirement, so we're good to go on that. I'll cover real quick the tools that you'll need for this. It's a really basic set of tools I've got here, with probably one exception, and that's the torque wrench. It's probably not normal that most people would have a torque wrench laying around. It is not required, but it's recommended because then you can torque down the drain plug to the specified torque setting. So here's the list. We of course have our fluid. I'll put quantities and links in the description for it. We've got a funnel. This one just happens to work nicely for this, so I'll put a link in the description for that as well. I will not put a link in the description for my 19mm socket. It does not need to be a deep well socket, but that's what I happen to grab. I've got a regular ratchet for taking it out, and then I've got my 1/2-inch torque wrench. Link in the description for that as well. And then I've got just a small flathead screwdriver, and this is required to extract the dipstick out of the little tube because there's a little lock on it, so I'll show you that as well. I'm also going to be using my scanner. Nissan does have a temperature target that we need to be at to check the fluid level. Now, I get a lot of questions every time I'm using a scanner to pull transmission temperature. When I'm doing a transmission service, people always say, well, how can I do it without that? And you can get it in the ballpark, and so I will let you kind of be the judge of that, because by the book, it needs to be at 160 degrees when we check the fluid level. So that's what we're going to do in this video, and I'll put a link to that scanner in the description. I happen to have the Zurich branded one. Here we go, manufacturer versus brand. I've got a Zurich branded one. It is not made by Zurich Harbor Freight. It is made by Innova, so I'll link both of them down in the description. You can pick whichever one happens to be the better deal at the time if that's something you're interested in buying. But it's about a $300 scanner, and if you're just doing this one service, you probably don't want to buy it. However, it's very convenient to have a decent scanner around, so I would encourage you to consider one, whether or not it's this one. So that's going to be how we're doing this video, showing you the right way at the correct temperature to do it. Otherwise, you can kind of ballpark it and let the thing idle for 15-20 minutes, and you'll probably be somewhere in the range. I can't promise that. So here we are underneath. Here's the driver's side, and here's the front of the vehicle. Here's the transmission. So here's our drain plug. So we've got great access right here. And I will point out where the filters are. So if you wanted to change both filters, you need to drop down the pan. There's a bunch of 10mm bolts all the way around. And the filter's located right in the back here. And then there's another filter right in this housing. There's 4 10mm bolts that hold this housing on. And the access is a little bit rough. You can see it pretty easy, but I promise you it's a little bit of a pain to get that cover off of there. But there's a little round filter in there. It looks like a little cartridge oil filter, and that's basically what it is. And so those are the 2 filters in here if that's something you want to address. Now, I don't know the service history on this transmission. That's in fact why I'm doing it. The owner loves his Nissans. He's got 4 or 5 Nissans right now, and he hasn't had transmission issues with any of these. But he mentioned it's here for some other stuff, and he said, why don't you change out the transmission fluid? I don't know when that's been done. And I said, that's a great idea if you don't know when that's been done. So I'm not sure what to expect here. So we're going to put this 19mm ratchet and socket on here. And that was tight. It was tighter than I expected. But pretty much once you crack them loose, then they pretty much come out by hand after that. So we'll loosen this up. We'll pull that out. All right, this fluid is dark. This isn't horrifyingly dark, but this is dark. I'm glad we're doing this service. It is well needed in this case. I'm going to clean off this drain plug. There's no magnet or anything like that. There are a couple magnets. I believe these divots right here, there's 2 magnets in the pan right there. So there again, not a bad idea to drop down the pan and clean all that off and everything. But you can see, obviously, with how dark the fluid is, there is obviously a bit of very fine material suspended in the fluid. And that's why I think that this is the #1 thing you can do, is drain all that old fluid out with all that stuff suspended in it and get some nice, fresh, clean stuff in there. What I typically do with drain plugs and crush washers, you can see this copper crush washer, and what I typically do is I just inspect them, and if there's clearly some flaw or imperfection in it, I'll put a new one on. In most cases, I just reuse the old one. I have not had issues reusing the old ones most of the time, so that's kind of by default what I do. We are down to just a dribble, so you could let it sit here until it absolutely stops, but at this point, there's maybe, another ounce or 2 we're going to get out of there? Maybe, probably not even that. So this looks good enough to me. So we're going to reinstall the drain plug. And then we've got our torque wrench set to 25 foot-pounds. I don't know if you can see that or not, but 25 foot-pounds, which is 33.9 Newton meters if you're going by the metric standard. We're going to get that on here. All right, we've got that torque down good. With a long torque wrench like this, it does not feel particularly tight, but that's the spec. We'll wipe that off. And now we're ready to set this thing down and fill it up. So here we are under the hood. So we're going to take a screwdriver. We're going to stick it in here. We're going to keep it tight to the metal part that is not the dipstick itself. And we're going to stick it down here, and then we're going to move it that way and release it. And then we can pull it out. That one actually came out really easy. Sometimes these things really are a pain, but you want to make sure that you've released it. So there's a tab right there, and that is what you are pushing when you stick the screwdriver in and flip it like that. You are releasing that little catch right there. And then you can pull the dipstick tube. Then we'll get our funnel in. Now, as I'm sure you've noticed, I have switched funnels. That other one is my favorite transmission service funnel, and it works in everything except not in this. So I'll put a link to this one and not the other one, because that one will not work in this case. So we'll get the funnel in here, and then we'll start pouring the fluid in. And check the description. I will put the quantity you need in the description. I don't know right now exactly how much I'm going to need, so I'll put that information down below for you. I've had it idling for a little while now. I've plugged my scanner in and it says no codes are found. That's what we expected. We're going to go down here and we're going to click menu, and then we're going to go down to service check using the arrows here. Service check, and then we're going to hit enter. Is that our vehicle? Yes. And what should pop up is the transmission temperature. There we go, transmission fluid temperature, 149. So we've got 11 degrees to go until we check the level. All right, I've got it up to 160 degrees. I did shift into reverse and to drive, so I don't know that they require that, but it's not a bad idea to shift it through the gears before checking the level. We've got our dipstick cleaned off here, and we've got our hash marks right here, and those are the levels, and it says hot. So we're checking hot, 160 degrees. Between those lines there, we're going to insert the dipstick all the way down in and pull it out. And if you can see, we are right to the full mark. So I'm going to, now that we know it is to the correct level and full, we're going to insert the dipstick back in here. We will line it up this time. And we'll push it all the way down and lock it into place. And we're good to go. Now in this case, I did use the full 5 quarts. I would say it's probably a good idea to start at 4.5 and then work your way up. It's a lot easier to add a little bit more than it is to take a little bit out. So we're all wrapped up and we're ready to send this down the road. Obviously in this case, I used a lift. It's not required for this job, but the one thing you do want to make sure you do is that you have it level when you're setting the fluid level. So in this case, I had it up in the air, I drained out the fluid, and then I set it down and filled it up and checked the level. If you do it on ramps or something, I would recommend put 4, maybe 4.5 quarts of fluid in it, then you can drive it off the ramps, get it on level ground, and then you can proceed with warming it up and getting it dialed into the correct fluid level. This is a simple job that you can do anywhere. And there again, if you want to be a little bit more aggressive with it, if you feel like your transmission is maybe neglected and you want to change out those filters, absolutely by all means do that. But I think if you stay on top of regular service intervals, changing out the fluid and keep it looking clean, I think that you could probably ignore those filters forever and never encounter a problem. I think the fluid is a far more important thing to be changing out than those filters are. Thanks for watching.